So pull up a chair, turn down those lights, and let us take you off trail and deep into the world of the hairy giant we know as Bigfoot.
I think an interesting guest this week. This is kind of a Bigfoot from a different angle, don't you think, Chuck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, Stacy. How are you tonight?
Well, good evening. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I always to talk about this. This is a very interesting show.
Yeah, I think in the 2.5 years I've been involved in this, I think I've only kind of approached it from this angle. Most of the time, it's always hearing somebody about their experiences and. You know, it's interesting to hear about this kind of stuff. I think most of us have suspected stuff involving the government and other agencies knowing about certain things related to Squatches or / Bigfoot, but, you know, it's kind of one of those things you never really, I haven't heard an entire show on, so maybe we'll get some good inside tidbits maybe.
I know that you have, actually witnessed and been in front of a Bigfoot and seen one, and I haven't, and you know for sure they exist, and I don't. But I mean, I believe they exist, but I've never seen one. But I just can't believe if these things are out there that the government doesn't know about them. I mean, you always hear of them around, U.S. Army bases and stuff like that, and I just cannot believe that the government doesn't know about this, and for some reason is trying to keep it a secret.
Oh, I think it's pretty certain.
Reasons of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good reasons to want to keep things hush hush. I'm definitely certain of that. So,
right.
Just like the government does with a lot of things. So, well, I appreciate everybody coming tonight. Hope like I said, everybody had a good week. Hope you're having a decent weather. We had an incredible weekend weather. Oh my gosh, man, it was like 50s, low 60s so far this weekend and some.
Really?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, today I think what did it get up to today? I think it was like 55. Bright, sunny, blue sky today. I mean, for early winter or late fall, it was just a beautiful day here. It would have been great. I didn't get a chance to go out squatching or even hiking today, but it would have been a great day to get out. I wish I would have gotten out in this weather, but kind of makes me, not to cut you off if you were going to say something, Chuck. I just wanted to get, somebody had reminded me something before the show, and it's probably a really good point to drive home because it's kind of a soft spot with me, actually. I think you know what I'm going to say, but, I had somebody come to me, get a hold of me this week. This is like the 6th person that I've talked to this year. A couple of people at the beginning of the year, in January and February during the winter, and now as we're getting into colder weather. I think there's a lot of, maybe most people know this, but I've had my issues with going out into the woods and getting hammered by a tick.
Right.
And somebody called me today, and they were out hiking yesterday with their significant other in the woods, and that was, I think it was like low 40-degree weather. We've already had in northeastern Ohio like 3 or 4 frosts already.
Right.
There's a lot of assumptions that these things like aren't in existence. I mean, they go down in their number and you don't see them as much, but I've already got nailed. Found one crawling on me about 2 weeks ago after several frosts, and somebody I know ended up finding one on them with a rash and all that good stuff, and got a little bit of a scare, with all Lyme disease and all that other junk out there. Just people wear your DEET and wear your other stuff out in the woods that you need to get keep these suckers off you. Maybe light clothing so you can see them crawling up you, because these things are not good to get tangled with, let me tell you. So I just kind of wanted to put. What's that?
We're all white.
Yeah, we're all white. Yeah. People be that was a giant yeti coming down the trail there. They're wearing all white.
You won't ever go out in the woods again after you see how many bugs are on you. You're out there.
Oh yeah, it's unbelievable. But don't make the assumptions just because it's cold out there that these things aren't wandering around and they can't climb on you and still make you as sick as they can during the summer. So just a word of caution for people. So
that is
that's
good.
My little.
You should bring that up because you.
That's my little disclaimer. Yeah, you got that right. That's my little disclaimer for the show. So let's get on to better things here. Bring Mr. Jevning on. William, do you prefer William or Bill?
Actually, I go by Will.
Okay. Boy, you're throwing me a curveball right at the start, aren't you?
Hey, Will.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
too.
too.
For coming on tonight. We really appreciate you coming.
Oh, you're certainly welcome.
Where are you from, William?
Well, I'm originally from Puyallup, Washington, but I currently live in Northern California.
All right. I wasn't sure. I was so hoping at the beginning of the show that I had told you Eastern time, 9 p.m. Eastern, because sometimes people, don't know what time to call in, and they call in 9 p.m. their time, So
Right,
I'm glad you
right.
got the message. So yeah, we were worried about that. Before we get into the actual possible government cover-up of Bigfoot, can you tell us your experiences with Bigfoot and how you got involved?
Well, it's been, for me, 39 years in December since the first time I saw tracks. A friend of mine and I, when we were 14, we were walking one weekend over to another friend's house, and there was snow on the ground, so we decided to take a different route than what we normally would have gone through the woods. We walked down the road and along a line of railroad tracks, and we came upon a small amount of intestines between the rails, and we thought, well, this is kind of weird. There were no tracks around them anywhere to see what kind of animal had put them there. So we could see, of course, the way we came, nothing was there, and nothing below the fire road below us. So I told my friend Mark, well, you take a walk up ahead and look, and I'll climb the embankment to my left. And as soon as I crested that hill, there were tracks everywhere up there. And, of course, we'd never heard the word Bigfoot at that point. That was 1972. So I hollered for him, and we looked, and we could see there were 3 different sizes of tracks and a place where something really big had set down along the edge of the embankment and apparently had tossed these intestines down between the rails. And it was about 17 degrees out that day, so we figured since they weren't frozen that whatever had done that was still close by. So that time fear set in, and we finished running the rest of the distance to our other friend's house. And our buddy's father says, okay, boys, take me back, show me what you found. And he brought his gun and a camera, took a bunch of pictures, and he told us what he thought it was. And, of course, at that age, we're kind of standing there with our jaws hanging on the ground. And from that point on, for months, we went out every weekend looking in the surrounding forest. And, of course, we didn't see anything more, so we kind of gave up the idea. And then in the fall of 1974, my dog was going crazy one night, and so I untied him from his house. He went running out to the tree line, and I grabbed one of my 22s thinking it was a raccoon or something. So I followed him out there. He froze at the edge of the tree line and came racing back past me to the house, and I thought, I never saw him do anything like that before. So I walked up to the tree line, and I heard something moving in there, and I stepped just inside, about 15 feet away from this enormous, hairy, man-like creature, and I thought, oh, Lord, what do I do now? I've got, just a 22 with me. So I thought, well, I'll shoot up in the air and see what happens, let it know I'm armed. And it was digging in the leaves with its right foot. I can still picture the tendons as the foot moved, arched upward and everything. So when I shot, another one stepped from my right towards the first one. It was a slightly smaller creature. And I thought, okay, now it's time to do what the dog did. And I took off running to the house. So it froze really hard that night. My buddies and I went out before first light with our rifles, and our hunting rifles this time. And we followed the tracks for a couple of miles till the sun finally came out and thawed the frost, and we lost the trail. And of course, and then another friend of mine overheard us talking. We didn't tell anybody because the first time we found tracks, we were made fun of pretty heavily. So we were quiet about this incident. And this other friend of ours apparently written a letter to John Green and Renee DeHinden in British Columbia. And of course, I didn't know who these people were. I didn't even know he was going to write a letter until DeHinden showed up at my house in the summer of '75 and asked me all about, and I knew who he was at this point because when he showed up, because I had been given a couple of books that Green wrote. And we talked, and he invited me to their camp at South Hill, Puyallup, where there were a lot of screams and a lot of sightings going on at that time, and that's where I met Green and a number of other people in the issue. And DeHinden and I established a friendship from that time on that lasted 25 years till he passed away in 2001.
Wow. Well, let me stop you there because I have a few questions about this.
Okay.
First, the tracks. How big were the tracks you found?
There were 3 sets. The largest was 18 inches, and the other 2 were 15 and 16-inch tracks.
That is a big guy, 18 inches.
Yeah, that's the upper end, the upper limit of tracks normally.
Yeah.
How wide are we talking?
The big track was about 6 inches across the heel and probably a little bit more across the midfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And the other two were about 5 inches across the heel and 6 inches across the midfoot.
Mm-hmm.
Very clear tracks in the snow, though.
Yeah, oh, okay. When you first saw them, I mean, did it scare the heck out of you? I mean,
it scared the hell out of me. I was used to animals. I mean, I grew up on a farm, kind of in a very rural area, where elk had come down and eat with the cattle in the morning, and there were plenty of bear and all kinds of other animals around. So, and I hunted, deer and elk and bear with my dad and uncle. So, I was pretty used to all that. But when I saw this, it was like, I mean, it's totally out of your frame of reference. You have nothing to compare it with. If you don't know
it's like monsters exist, right?
Exactly. That's the first thing, and it's funny. I have an ongoing, a real fresh sighting I'm working right now, and I talked to the witnesses over the past few days, and they said exactly the same thing that came to my mind that many years ago, and I told them, well, of all the thousands of people I've talked to over all these years, that's exactly what everyone says. You don't realize that monsters are really out there.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought the same thing. I mean, Stacy, my co-host, he saw one within 20 feet of him, a pure white one.
Correction, 35 feet. 35
feet.
Close enough.
Hey, Will, I'll remember every detail about my sighting, so I can correct
it as much
as I want. You do.
It can be just a few seconds, and all those details will stay very clear in your mind for the rest of your life.
Oh, yeah, I never forget it.
And then I ended up moving to Vancouver, Washington, a number of years later after I got out of the Army. And friends there were saying, well, why don't you get back involved in this? I had done it, on and off while I was in the Army. In fact, you were talking earlier when the show first started about the Army incidents happening on Army bases. When I was stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington, I was a squad leader with an air cav unit at the time in 1980, and we had our squads out in the field. And one night, the last night we were in the field, my platoon sergeant radioed me and said, well, we're not going to be doing anything tonight, so just have your men practice ambush positions. So I said, okay. And scouts are basically on your own. You're not really connected to regular units. So we were a long ways away from anybody waiting for the helicopters to come pick us up in the morning. So I had the guys, I told the team leaders, go ahead and position your men. And I took my radio man between the two fire teams that were spread out on this road into a tree line. And this was the first year we had night vision goggles. And they weren't really that good. You could see where you were going, but couldn't really make out distinct shapes that well. And as I entered the tree line, something really large right in front of me took a big step to the left. And instantly my skin just went cold. I told the poor kid, I said, back up, going out of the tree line. And I hollered for the team leaders to assemble the squad on the road. And I said, okay, we're not going to do this. We're going to sit here in a big circle and just sleep for the night. And all those men, I had 15 men, and to this day they would all swear that we had a Sasquatch walking around us for a couple hours that night. Because you could hear
there are quite a few sightings of Bigfoot in and around Fort Lewis doing the same thing you were doing in the in the encounters on the different sites, Bigfoot sites.
Right.
I've read a lot of them from Fort Lewis, yeah.
Hey, Chuck.
Yeah.
I had told them in the chat room, too. I ahead of time, in preparation, I looked up some, especially related to the Army, and I even got one involving the FBI. I'm going to be putting some links in during the show, and I'll put into the chat room for some interesting reading if anybody has any interest in them.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of that stuff online. I mean, you've written a book. Did the book wrote Notes from the Field? Is that take in all of this, all of your history plus the things you've learned since then? I mean,
well, the book primarily, I didn't really know what to write. I had a good friends bug me for years and years to write something, and for a long time I was, like I said, kind of more helping Hendon out with his investigation. I mean, I did all my own work. When I moved to Southern Washington, he was glad I was there because he said I was one of the best field people there were. So I worked that area for a long time and would send him things. And then when he passed away, my friend said, well, you need to come out and say something now about what you know. So I thought, okay, I've never written a book. Let me see how to do this. And I thought, well, let me make it a good basic book for people in the first half to really lay the whole issue out logically, you know, beginning with what's in the fossil record, what's in historical documents. 300 years ago, Spanish missionaries collected stories. For the past 200 years, every decade there are newspaper articles, lots of them, that show documented history. And then in the 1950s, when Hendon was really the first one who made people pay attention to this subject, in 1956 is when it really began. And then from then on, of course, things led up to Patterson getting his film and so on. But I wanted to make sure that people were clear on that, how that history, how everything is developed. And then the fourth chapter is about myself, just so people know who I am and where I've come from. And then the second half of the book is I talk about evidence.
Right.
And then the end of it, of course, I try to answer some questions. I could have done a lot more. Of course, that's why I'm writing another book now. And with the question of cover-ups is sort of how I got, that's how I got involved with the issue of cover-ups. So I've been with researching, looking at what people are saying and questions they're asking, and you know, it gives me tips about where to look. And I didn't think about cover-ups until I read on a chat site somebody was asking a question about cover-ups and why they would occur and so on. And it made me think, of course, with the Hendon Association, we never considered cover-ups. It was, you know, evidence was evidence. It was black and white. And if it wasn't clear, we didn't even look at it. So since he's been gone, I've been looking at a little bit different angles on things. And cover-ups, I have had actually two experiences myself that would be very well considered cover-ups, with Forest Service being involved both times.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you tell us how you first got into the thinking that there might be a cover-up going in, and also what is the reason why you think the government would want to keep this from the American public? What's the main reason? Is it money?
Well, I really think money is the basis behind it. I mean, you know, most things are pretty well driven by finances in this country and everywhere, really. And I didn't think much about it until when I was researching my book. I talked to a Forest Service employee who had specialized in the Endangered Species Act, and she explained to me how all of that works. Basically, when a new species is discovered, they have to shut down anything environmental about it. In other words, if a Sasquatch were to exist, they'd have to shut the forest down because it would take until scientists figured out, you know, where it needed to live, what it needed to have, where people didn't impact that, especially, I mean, and of course, the more serious and a large ground-dwelling primate in North America would be pretty much at the top of the list of importance. And if you think about the impact financially, if the logging industry were paralyzed, which it would be, and all the associated businesses that support that industry, it would be a huge economic problem in the country. And I really think that's the basis of a cover-up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That filters all the way down to the housing industry there, Chuck.
Absolutely. You think about all the spin-off industries that would affect all those.
Yeah.
And do you think it's the experience the government had with the who was the owl? The owl that
the spotted owl. Oh yeah. If you think in terms of a spotted owl affecting the logging industry the way it did, and it still impacts it today, something like a large ground-dwelling primate would certainly have a much greater effect than that.
Right. Oh my God, yeah.
Oh, you think about the impact; it's enormous.
Yeah,
and if that isn't a good reason for a cover-up, then there isn't any.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, I've had people tell me, I didn't think much about it. I had a friend who was involved in cattle mutilations in Portland, Oregon years ago, and he was interested in Bigfoot, so he contacted me after he saw a newspaper article about me in 1988. And we became friends. And he was a pretty smart guy. but he told me he knew a lot about government involvement with things, and all he would ever tell me was, he'd say, well, you need to watch out for certain vehicles. They'll follow you around. They'll keep tabs on you. And they were pretty nondescript vehicles, except they had small antennae in odd locations. And I used to think, okay, this guy's crazy. You know, nice guy, but he doesn't, you know, nobody's going to follow me around. Well, I started noticing these two particular vehicles were following me, and I happened to take my binoculars whenever I'd see them, and they did have the antenna and the locations he mentioned. So I thought, well, this is odd. I mean, I don't know if I was being followed by government employees or not, but it was certainly interesting to me. And he used to tell me that the government was actually collecting Sasquatches, killing them, and depositing them in the southeast part of the country.
No.
Now, I don't know, I don't have any information that supports that, but I've been talking to some old-timers recently who've been involved in this longer than I have, who tell me that, yes, there has been things like this going on. So I'm in the process of collecting information now to see where this goes.
Did you say they were trapping them and moving them south, or just killing them?
That was the claim. Well, some were being taken, some weren't. In fact, one of the stories that was sent to me recently was, and I don't have the information in front of me, but it was a fire in Nevada, a forest fire where one actually was surrounded by Forest Service employees, and it essentially gave itself up. It was burned over quite a large part of its body. They brought in a doctor, veterinarian. They treated its wounds, and they took it away somewhere, an undisclosed location to be released, according to the story. So that tells me that there is indeed some involvement going on. They know apparently how to treat them. It was taken away in a vehicle. It was the type where people wouldn't think a firefighter had been injured because the news media would come in on something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this information is trickling in.
Well, you know, you hear these stories all the time. I always heard the story after Mount St. Helens exploded, and the government went in and was getting rid of a lot of the large animals that were laying around in the rivers and stuff like that. And supposedly they found a few Bigfoot that had died, and they brought them back in helicopters, and the Army or the National Guard, whoever was handling it, saw them, and they were moved away from the other dead animals and put in special trucks and shipped away. And did you ever hear that story?
Well, you know, it's interesting about that. My unit, I was stationed at Fort Lewis. In fact, I was flying back from Yakima the morning that Mount St. Helens erupted, and I was joking with the pilots that, you know, at that time it looked like just a big cloud bank, and the pilot come across my headset and he says, "Hey, Sarge, you know what that is?" And I said, "Yeah, it's misery," because I thought we were all dirty from being in the field for so long. And I thought, you know, the guys are going to take forever to get cleaned up, and I'm not going to get to go home for forever. So I said, "Yeah, it's misery." He says, "No." He says, "St. Helens just blew. They got to reroute us north around Mount Rainier." And I recall at the time the National Guard got a lot of the credit for using their helicopters. In reality, it was regular Army helicopters from my unit. It was the 3-5 Air Cavs helicopters that were being used largely down there. And my squad, well, the whole platoon actually was going to go down, and for some reason they decided not to send us down to help with the rescue work, only use the pilots. And our pilots, I knew quite a few of them, they were pretty quiet. They never said much about what was going on down there. So, yeah, to this day, I don't really know the details of everything, but I did hear some of those stories later, and I thought, well, it's possible because they were so quiet. Usually the pilots talked about a lot of the things they did.
Right.
So it's entirely possible.
When they were flying over that area, all the trees were down. And you could see large creatures that had died, you know, large elk and bears and whatever. And the ones that were especially near the water and all, they didn't want them to be in the rivers and stuff, so they would apparently flying them out of there or dumping them in a big pile somewhere and burning them. But they didn't burn the Bigfoot. They took them away in trucks or helicopters or something like that. I forget the exact story, but I've heard that many times, yeah.
Looks like my friend told me he was... I never really got to question him a lot about it, but he did say that a lot of them were removed to places like Georgia, Why they were taken there, I don't know, and what was done with them, I don't know.
Amazing. You have a story on your site, on your blog about Georgia and the rangers and telling people not to wander off the trails. That they're not gonna, they don't want people looking for them and stuff like that.
Well, there were actually two incidents that were pretty interesting that I've received recently investigating this. One was from Georgia, from a group, Georgia Bigfoot Society, where one of their members was looking in an area, went a little bit off trail in, I believe, a national park there, or a state park, and a ranger confronted him and said, "You're not allowed to go off the trail." The guy says, "Well, I'm here looking for Sasquatch tracks and evidence," and the ranger said, "We know about those. You're not allowed to go off trail looking for them." Another incident would happen during the filming of the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek in 1971 in Arkansas, and the individual involved was one of the people involved in making the film, and apparently during the making of the film, the creature actually came and harassed the film crew, and it was all rather unexpected, and this individual decided to go out and look for the creature, and was verbally ordered by the governor of Arkansas at that time not to look for it.
Right.
So to me, that was pretty interesting, and like I said, I'm still receiving information from him, so I don't want to say too much yet until the picture is clear what was going on, but it's some very interesting stuff.
Right. Do you think that, do you think that the state and federal government, the rangers are being, do you think it's all coming down from the federal government to the state and federal rangers to, hush everything about Bigfoot?
Well, I'm not sure. I wondered when I first started thinking about it if it were individual rangers, because I've gone places and talked to rangers and were given information, but in retrospect, it wasn't new information. For instance, in Estacada, Oregon, I stopped and talked to some rangers, and one of them knew about an old homestead where they found a family Bible, and there were references in the Bible, where the kids weren't allowed to play in certain areas because of these creatures and so on. But that wasn't something that could be, there was nothing recent to go look at. I have an incident that happened where a couple of guys came across one just last weekend, and they took pictures of the tracks that were fresh in the snow, showing the rangers deer and bear tracks they also found, and they were, very friendly toward them when they were looking at those pictures. Then one gentleman said, "Well, let me show you these pictures I also took," and they instantly turned off to these guys very quickly, didn't want anything more to do with them. They thought they left when these two guys overheard the rangers talking very serious about the subject of Bigfoot and what they were going to do about it. And, of course, the guys left before, they heard any more. But so it was interesting to me that there was that attitude towards something like that.
We had a ranger out of Oklahoma, retired fish and game guy, apparently with the state of Oklahoma, come out on one of the Bigfoot blogs saying there was a radio interview with him, and he said that the state had been studying Bigfoot in Oklahoma for years. They've been taking down evidence about them, how they eat, what they eat, where they live, when they mate, and everything. And then apparently he did a show on Blog Talk Radio. He was on a show recently, and he all of a sudden said he was studying him, not the state. The story just like
put some pressure on him.
Yeah, it sure sounds like that, because I really wanted to interview this guy, and but after I found his story had changed, it wasn't the same anymore,
Well, the two incidents I was involved in happened in the early 90s near Mount Adams in Washington, and I worked with, one of my coworkers knew that I was an investigator, and apparently his father and a friend of his were in that area scouting the area for deer hunting. It was just just before deer hunting, a couple of weeks before the season opened, and they had to go cross country because a lot of roads are closed in that area that used to be open, which is another interesting fact. I think that about 20 years ago, the government decided to close off all these areas. You can't even drive in. It used to be you could drive in and camp along a river anywhere there was a wide spot. You can't do it anymore, anywhere. They blocked the roads. The places that were formerly wide spots in the road, they've piled big mounds of soil on. You can't go anywhere, so it's very restricted where you can and can't go anywhere.
Oh.
But so these roads were blocked off back then, gated. But these guys built Bajas out of Volkswagen Beetles, and they could go cross country with them. So they went back in this area, and it's very thick dust, powder, almost like flour on the roads. And they came across this set of tracks, hundreds of these tracks. And so they said, okay, geez, this has got to be Bigfoot. So they came out, called their son, the one gentleman did, and he says, hey, I know who you can talk to go look at this. So they contacted me right away. I left work, went with them, and we got there about 3 or 4 hours after they found the tracks. And when we got to the area, well, let me back up a little bit. On the way in, they saw a Forest Service water truck, the kind that's used to support firefighting efforts.
Right.
And the guy was just cutting tree limbs and kind of doing some preventative fire maintenance work. So they didn't think much about him, and they ran into a supervisor, a guy that identified himself as a supervisor who was in uniform, and they told him what they found. And they said he grabbed a pretty expensive-looking camera out of a case in the truck, asked where they found the tracks. They told him, he said he was going to go document it, and that if they contacted him later, that they could get copies of the pictures. So that's when they came out, they got in touch with me, and we went directly back out to the place. Well, when we got there, both trucks were gone, and we could see the tracks where they had gone. They had gone into the gate to the place where these guys found these footprints. And I'd fought forest fire one summer years ago, so I knew what misting looked like, basically to bring the temperature down on any fuel, so that it wouldn't catch fire. They had misted the road section just where the tracks were. And what effect it caused was it erased the tracks without looking like they had destroyed them.
Right.
You could see the thickness of the dust was down, from probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches to about 1/4 of an inch. And you could see droplets of water and such. So they had purposely destroyed the tracks. And then when the gentleman went to try to find the supervisor, there they had his name and everything, he didn't exist.
And why is that? Why is it that this is, every time you want to get information from these people, they don't exist anymore? It
and
seems
the other
like
incident was
quite a few of the stories. Yeah.
At Mount St. Helens, roughly the same year, if you go north of Cougar towards Mount St. Helens, there's a little place called Eagles Cliff. It's a store and campground, and the owner and I were friends, and I used to stop by and talk to him, let him know what I was doing if I found anything new in the area, and he would do the same for me. He'd pass on any information he got. Well, we drove into the store this particular day, and he says, hey, there's a hot one going just up the road about 1/2 mile. Forest Service biologists came in here, told us that some of the local had found tracks. We should go up and take a look. So I said, okay, we'll go up there. And he said, you'll probably see the biologist. He is just not too long ago, maybe an hour or so ahead of you up there. I said, okay, we'll chat with him. So fortunately, I had some of my group with me that helped me search areas and were pretty good at looking. So we went up there, we searched the whole creek area where these tracks were supposedly found. We didn't find anything up there. And so I came back to the store and I said, well, we didn't see anything. And they said, no, the guy that found him was a local, very good member of the community. He doesn't make up things. If he said he saw something, he saw something. So I said, okay, we'll go down and talk to the Forest Service. So we drove down the road to where the office was. We had the guy's name. Nobody liked that around. Nobody had seen any biologists in the area. It was just their regular staff there. They didn't know what I was talking about. So again, somebody that supposedly was up there, an official in uniform, vanished.
I mean, you don't think that it was one of these secretive government guys that you said, runs around and there's those cars with the antennas that follows up kind of stories and then just gets the evidence and nobody ever hears about it again,
Well, I do wonder sometimes because, if somebody's doing something like that, they could certainly put on a uniform and impersonate Forest Service personnel.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. Do you have any rangers on or off the record that will talk to you and give you information that you can talk about now? Or
Well, not right at the moment, but I'm working on that angle right now. In fact, my best friend from high school was dating a ranger at Mount Rainier, and there are a number of stories I have from that area that are fairly recent, so he's going to see what he can get from her. And I think that's a good angle to get it from. I think she'll talk to him. So we might be able to get some of that off the record at least.
Do you know of any retired... Go ahead, Stace.
Oh, no, I was just wondering if Will had... it's funny for the show, it's funny that you mentioned Mount Rainier. Am I correct correct me if I'm wrong here, I remember seeing a report when I first started getting into this Bigfoot. One of the first reports I ever saw of military personnel being associated with any Bigfoot sightings was, I can't remember what decade it was, if it was the last 10 or 20 years, but I don't know if you're familiar with it. The Army Rangers were doing night maneuvers, and I don't know if you're familiar with the sighting, and there was a group of 4 or 5 of them that ended up reporting it to a database, and I can't remember where I saw it at right off the top of my head, but do you have any familiarity with any, like the Army Rangers doing maneuvers or anything like that?
Well, we used to work with the Rangers occasionally, so it's possible. I was a scout, so we did a lot of the same type of work during the same hours. Specifically off the top of my head, I don't, but I do know there were a number of stories from units around Fort Lewis.
Why are there so many reports of Bigfoot around Army bases?
Well, I don't know about different Army bases, but Fort Lewis, well, there's a group that I've been able to ascertain of Sasquatch. It's the same ones that I saw as a teenager that move up and down those valleys. Where their feeding routes, they go up and down those valleys, and one of them they either follow the Nisqually over onto Fort Lewis, and we found tracks just a few years ago. My brother-in-law did on the Carbon River, which is another valley comes down through the town of Ording. So it's I expect it occasionally for things to be seen over there because that's sort of the terminus of their foraging in that direction. Then they go back up into the mountains from there.
Right. So many of these bases are huge.
Yeah, you can look at sightings. Fort Lewis is the third biggest base land-wise the U.S. has, so there's a lot of space out there, a lot of unused training area.
Right. And they would almost be protected there because, normal people aren't allowed on the base, right?
That's right, that's right.
So,
yeah, it's so big, even when we'd even fly out there, there were so many places you could go. From the air, I didn't realize how big it was until I was stationed there.
Yeah. And it's like all forest, right? A lot of it's just forest.
Most of it is, yeah. Yeah, it's old forest.
Right. Old forest with lots of old Bigfoot on it.
Exactly. That's right.
Stacy lives near a base. It's called Ravenna Arsenal in Ohio. And
hey, if you're going to use one of my areas or one of the areas that is in my state, pronounce it right, buddy.
What the hell's it?
Ravenna Arsenal.
Ravenna. I know. I'm from Maryland. I pronounce it Ravenna. It's a huge base, and they have had a lot of Bigfoot sightings around there. And it's like one of these storage bases, I think.
Yeah.
And all it is got all these what are those things called that they store weapons in?
Just big warehouses where they used to store a lot of it. It was armament storage at one time.
Right.
I don't know how much of it's used. Yeah.
Most of it's like woods and everything, and it's huge, and there's hardly any people on that base, and it's all protected. It's got a fence around it, except for these big holes that the Bigfoot goes through.
Well, that could be because of lack of people, and there's obviously food source for them there. So, you know, it's one of the things I learned through my research, and one of the things I believe, I'll put it this way, that when you look at historically, a lot of the Indians have told me that they chased these creatures out of their hunting areas when they first arrived, that they were already there when their people came. So humans being pack hunters, I think, if that is the case, they chased them out of the area. Nothing could really stand up to a pack hunter. They chased them out to these remote areas, and they probably view humans as a predator. So they probably try at all costs to avoid humans.
Right. Oh, I would bet. I just think that these
they probably go to
bases,
places that are. Yeah, the Army keeps these big areas that don't have much around them, so it's probably a natural.
Right. I mean, do you think the government has known about these creatures for an awful long time?
Well, I think they know a lot of things. So it's very likely, sure. I mean, the information's been out there, and you mentioned about game department people. It jogged my memory about another thing where in the Mount St. Helens area there were a couple of not Forest Service, they were game department guys. We found a lot of tracks going up into, when I first started working in that area in the Washougal River, we found about 60 tracks at the snow line going up into the snowfield. And we were up there checking them out one day, taking pictures, and we heard this god-awful noise. It sounded like somebody with a crowbar trying to pry into my vehicle. So myself and one of my friends, the other group, kept going looking at the tracks. I said, let's go down and find out what's going on. And I saw two guys in a pickup. One was in the truck, one was out of the truck next to my car. And I kind of lit into the guy and was, asking him what the hell he thought he was doing trying to get into my car. And I happened to glance over and see the other guy was in uniform, and I thought, oops, well, I'm already into it. I may as well not look stupid and keep going. So he apologized and said they were game department officials, and he says, well, we didn't know what your car was doing up here, and give me this whole story about what they were doing. And I said, no, this is who I am and what I'm doing. And he says, oh, well, that's interesting. Do you mind if we, he says, if you ever need anybody to watch your truck when you're up in these areas doing your work, let us know. We'll keep an eye on your car. And at the time, I thought, well, that's pretty nice, So I would call them and let them know, and lo and behold, I'd find them checking out where I was, no matter where I was at in that region. Now that's roughly 3,300 square miles between Mount St. Helens and the Columbia River. That's a lot of country. I didn't tell anybody where I was going whenever I would go. So I always wondered how they knew each one of those times where I was going.
Well, you just set them up, because every time you would get a sighting, you'd probably go out looking or out looking for them.
Right.
And they know where you were going to go because you told them.
So now it makes me think, okay, is this what was happening with these guys too? Were they the ones keeping tabs on me?
Yeah, you're in their
database.
database.
I would have never considered at the time, but just recently, delving into this whole cover-up thing, I started having to rethink some of these past experiences.
Right. I believe Bigfoot exists. I believe Stacy. I know how it changed his life. I know that there's a big DNA project going on right now that has evidence that's supposed to come out and prove they exist. I believe this is going to happen, even though it hasn't happened yet. I still believe it's going to happen. But I just can't believe the government doesn't know all about this and hasn't known it for a long time. And I just wonder if they are the ones that keep a lid on all this, that never let any of this information really come out all the way.
Well, it's always information for so many years, and for it to not go anywhere is ridiculous. I mean, it's not like it's just with the UFO subject. It's just pictures and eyewitness statements. We have physical evidence.
Yeah, lots of physical evidence. Apparently, she's gotten a lot of DNA in there, and it all looks the same. And I just have a feeling, though, if this keeps being delayed, it it might not ever come out. I mean, I hope that's not true, and I'm
I can almost predict if there is a cover-up going on and it's behind, the government's behind it, then whatever's going on with that project it won't come out. It'll either won't come out or it'll be proved to be something else, or you know what I mean. There'll be some reason that it won't be justified in science.
Yeah, that's what I'm really scared about, and I'd like to go into that when we get back, because we're gonna, we're gonna take a break right now, do a few songs, and then let you take a break, get something to drink or if you want, and we'll be back in about, I guess, like 8 to 10 minutes. Stace, is that right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hold on. Stay there on the phone. I mean, don't have to stay on the phone, but just, you know.
You bet.
All right. We'll be back in a few minutes.
See everybody in a bit.
Take her away, Stacy.
Welcome back to Bigfoot Tonight Radio. Hope everybody had an enjoyable break, and I hope the music was semi-pleasurable to my host. Did you approve at least of the last song, Chuck?
I did. The last song was great.
I knew you wouldn't like the first one.
Didn't listen to that one.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, let's see if we can. I just look at something here. Okay, let's bring Will back on here. And can you hear me? Okay, Will.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. I just want to let everybody know, if anybody, after the break, if anybody has any interest in calling in, our number is 760-888-5753, or you can PM me in the chat room, and I can get to some questions for you for Will. Okay, Chuck.
Sounds good. Well, before we left for the break, we were talking about the DNA study and if it'll ever come out. And Melba, Dr. Melba Ketchum, released on her Facebook page saying, "Everybody, hold on. It's all going to come out. Just hold on." And basically that's been said for a while now. Mm-hmm. It's always in 3 months, it's always 3 months from now. And I believe her, I truly believe that she has everything she needs. I know that has the paper and everything like that. What I'm worried about is the government going to every one of these journals and saying, you publish this and you're
no more funding.
Right, no more funding. Your grants are gone. And that could be done so easily,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there could be lots of ways to suppress the information or to make it look invalid. Or in peer reviews, they could shred it. Whether it's real or not, they could do all kinds of things with it and say, well, this isn't valid.
Right. And, DNA evidence, like if you ever watched the old Monster Quest shows, they had a scientist on there from New York the guy with the mohawk haircut. He was doing all their DNA work. And, he would say on a lot of these cases, it came back human. It's got to be contaminated. That's what they always said. It came back human. It's contaminated. Right. And now what they're saying is that this may be, a human of some sort. It could be very close. Right.
It could be close enough where it would be. It could come up that way, sure.
Right, and they used to dismiss everything back then because it came back human. It was contaminated. It's always contaminated. So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, if your long experience in this field, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I still think they're going to find some way to invalidate the data, just because it's been so many years and we've had so much information. And they keep poo-pooing anything that comes up.
Yeah. I know.
That would be my prediction anyway.
God, I hope that's wrong. I truly hope that's wrong. Because everybody knows if this happens, if this comes out, that Bigfoot is for real. And I believe it's for real, but to be proven by scientists that it's real.
Right. Right.
Can you imagine how that's going to change the world?
The impact will be huge. It will be huge. When you look at the hominid record, and I'm not an anthropologist, but I've had a couple of years of courses in anthropology in college, so I know a little bit about it, at least enough to understand sort of how the primate record is set up. There's so many gaps in it, and certainly the Gigantopithecus did exist, which was actually larger than the Sasquatch. So that it leaves the question wide open that, well, certainly this could exist because other things that were bigger, very similar, did exist. We know that for sure. And there are plenty of gaps in the fossil record. It's not that, gorillas and chimps and orangutans were that close to us. They're sort of down the list a little ways where something like this would be much closer to us. And there should be things that we find, whether relic, hominids, or extinct ones, that fill those gaps.
For sure. I just think that for this not to have come out, a body not to be shot and brought to the public somehow,
well, now there's
for this not to ever happen in all this time, there's got to be somebody jumping in there, finding out where it's happening and grabbing it,
Now,
if it's
I
not
was
a beast or somebody, go ahead.
given some interesting information recently from one of my old-timer sources that, and I'm waiting to get a little more information on it, but I can say some of this, that apparently, well, if you're familiar with the Minnesota Iceman that was back in the late 60s, a Bigfoot-type creature that was shot and killed in northern Minnesota and displayed in a block of ice.
Right.
And was actually examined by some scientists and plenty of information that it was real.
Right.
And then taken across the Canadian border, and this was something I'd never heard before, but apparently the gentleman who was displaying it and charging money for it, took it across the Canadian border for display and then went to bring it back and were held up by the authorities because he said it was a dead body of something, and so there were some issues bringing something like that across the border. And
right.
supposedly, and I haven't verified the information, but supposedly actor Jimmy Stewart had some involvement with this. Made a phone call to then state or U.S. Senator Walter Mondale, who was supposedly made a phone call and got this thing back across the border. Then the original body disappeared and was replaced with a fake one in a block of ice. And then ultimately that disappeared also. So there's definitely some things, again, cover-up-wise that were happening as late as 1969.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, do you have any, I had a question from the chat room, do you have any evidence that will stand up, or is most of it hearsay?
That I have?
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about DNA evidence. When I was writing the book, I talked to a DNA expert in Edmonton who explained to me so that I could explain to readers what is good material to use for DNA analysis and what isn't. For instance, hair isn't that good because it breaks down so quickly and you have to have a known sample to compare it to. But feces, on the other hand, if you get it quick enough and it's frozen, it's very good. And one of the areas I work, I find lots of feces samples from Sasquatches. So once I can sort of get back in there and collect some of that, I think we'll have some very good evidence, and it might help support this other project. Should the information come out, we can get verified evidence from 2 different regions.
Right. But have you been able to collect about the cover-up?
On the cover-up stuff?
Yeah, on the cover-up.
Yeah, there is some stuff that's coming together pretty well, I think. And I'm hoping to get more people to come forward at least, even if it's off the record, so we can help piece the picture together. Right.
Yeah, because it's going to be hard to get government officials to say anything if they're working on the record.
Exactly.
That's almost impossible. They risk their job and their pension, and nobody's going to do that.
There is one person who... Yeah, there is one person I'm hoping that'll talk to me that's a former government employee who was heavily involved in this and was going to bring it out a number of years ago and then, for whatever reason, didn't. But I'm hoping that he will allow me to expose that information now.
Oh, that's great. If you get the word out like you are doing now, and that's, I guess, why we all heard about you is from your blog and other sites talking about you. But if you can get the word out and have people contact you, I think that's the best thing to do.
That's what I'm hoping. And to me, it was kind of a shock once I started reading what people were asking and then thinking about, well, yeah, this probably was a cover-up, and started piecing my thoughts together on things that have happened in the past. and to me it was unconscionable that they could do a thing like that. So I wanted to raise awareness about it and get people talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, if I hear anything, I'll send it to you. I just want to let everybody know out there, if you have any Bigfoot evidence, any hands or feet or anything like that, you can send them to me, post office box. No, I wish.
Well, you never know, though.
Yeah, I know.
What somebody's going to come forward with.
I know. You just don't know what people might have out there. I know. It's a big country and a lot of people. And
a lot of people don't know where to turn if they have something.
And, if they can be killed, and that was one problem. For a while, people never thought they could be killed. I mean, nobody's ever gotten a body. But if it's true that they can be killed, and from recent events that's supposedly true, people have hit them with their cars. It could have hit babies, running across the street. They apparently love running across the street in front of cars.
It's the number one sighting. It's the number one sighting event.
Yeah, it's like 60% of all records are Bigfoot running in front of cars and just missing them.
Exactly. Right.
And I think it's a game they play. I think they see cars coming a long way. They hear them. I mean, we can hear them. We can see them at night.
Sure.
Why wouldn't they, So it's a game with them.
I used to experiment in the Mount St. Helens with animals. I knew there were lots of animals around, but you never see them in the daytime. So, of course, they figured they're out at night. So I drive along in my Blazer in the mountains with the lights off, so they could see the roads fairly well, really slow. And occasionally I'd turn the lights on, and there was always some kind of animal in front of me on the road. They would hear the vehicle, but didn't really connect with where it was, but they would watch for the light, and if they see the light coming, of course, then they're out of sight. And so these guys are probably, obviously they know when a car is coming, so, maybe there is some kind of a challenge. I don't know why they would just, or maybe they're just crossing that ribbon of road at the right time at the right place when somebody sees them. I don't really know.
There's any creature that knows when humans are in the forest, they apparently know where they all are. I mean, they know where every trail cam is. They know how to miss them. They know how not to get a picture taken of them.
And especially one that purposely avoids.
Especially see a car coming down the road at night with lights on, making a lot of noise. I mean, I just can't believe they can't tell what a car is.
Because normally they avoid people at all costs.
Yeah.
For the most part.
They know a car is going fast and not staying there. They know these people are going somewhere. And I truly believe it's a game they can play to see how fast they can get across the road and not be hit.
And it could be because
so many.
Sometimes they do play little games. I mean, I've been out where, they've, and not just me. There's been plenty of other people where they've messed with campers. You look back in history where they've come in and done things purposely. There's that small percentage there that are, I wouldn't say, sometimes a little aggressive, sometimes just curious, where they'll come into a camp and do things, whether it's throwing something at the campers or. In our case, a buddy of mine was grabbed and partially pulled out of the tent. So it was,
come on. Really?
Yeah, one of the first times after I met the Jevning Green, we were talking. They said, well, boys, we'd like you to keep tabs on your area, and if you see or hear anything, let us know. So, of course, we're hyped up because these guys are famous. We're going to go out and start looking. And we were talking about it one day, and I said, well, anybody hear anything where you live? Do we know where to start? And one of my friends said, yeah, there's some stuff going on out near Fort Lewis, again, Fort Lewis, and at a place called the Clark Ranch. So we decided the next weekend we'd take our packs and we'd hike out there. So 4 of us did go out there, and the people who lived there gave us permission to go on their property, which bordered the Squally River, and we hiked a couple of miles back in there from the ranch and found a place to set up camp in a big cedar grove. And about, I want to say around 10 o'clock that night, one of the guys said he was getting tired just after we cooked our meal, and he wanted to go to sleep. So I said, well, we should probably stay up in shifts, have a buddy, 2 of us will stay up, 2 will sleep. Well, it didn't work out that way, so I said, go to sleep, we'll figure this out. So we were sitting there talking around the fire, and we heard him moving around in the tent. I mean, this was just after he went, so we figured, well, he's just goofing around in there. And all of a sudden he comes tearing out of the tent, wild-eyed, and he says, "It's not very funny, you guys messing with me, trying to grab me and pull me out of the tent." And I looked at him, we looked at each other, and we're like, "That's a pretty funny thing. You know, we would have, if we would have thought of that, would have been a great gag, but we didn't do it."
Right.
So I said, "Okay, tell me what happened." I said, "You sure you weren't sleeping and dreaming that something happened?" He says, "No,
Right.
I was laying there listening to the conversation. I never went to sleep." So I said, "Okay, if something come around to try to pull you out of the tent, there's got to be evidence." So right behind where I was kneeling down, we found these footprints in the soil there. It would come right up behind me, just a few feet away, and reached under the edge of the tent. We had an old cabin tent with no floor, and we figured later what had happened was it probably smelled the food we were making, decided to rummage through the pack to see if we had any more goodies to eat, latched onto him in the sleeping bag and started pulling him out. Well, when it realized it had a live body in the sleeping bag, let go. Well, they stayed around us all night, screaming. One of the guys saw one at one point. I mean, it was pandemonium until about 4:30 in the morning, and then finally they left us alone. But we figured there were 3 or 4 of them around us all night.
Was this back in the 70s?
This was in '76.
Wow, this was back before anybody was really looking for Bigfoot, except for those guys in the Northwest, right?
The originals, yeah, and then we were kind of, in fact,
you were like their
used to
buddy.
call me the last of his group in a way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this was back when Bigfoot, you know, had free reign, you know.
It was still pretty new then, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, can you tell us some more stories from back then? Do you have any, like, really good encounter stories that you heard back then?
Oh, geez, there were lots of them.
No, that's hard to hit right now.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of hit one on the head, but I mean, we're doing a lot of our own stuff. But yeah, I mean, of course, a lot of our stuff. Well, yeah, that particular incident, in fact, we took John Green. I had written him and told him about our experience on that one, and he says, "Okay, I'll come down and check it out." Well, I didn't think much about it until I got a phone call and he says, "Well, I'm going to be there in a couple hours. Do you still want to take me out to the area to where you had this stuff go on?" I said, "Sure."
Right.
Called a couple of buddies, said, "Yeah, Green's coming down. He's going to take us out and wants to look at the area." We arrived at the ranch and just got out of his van, and the scream started up. And he told me the last I talked to him years ago was, he said, "I'm still kicking myself for not taking the recorder." We probably took him closer than he had ever been to one.
Right. Oh, wow, that's great. That's great. You were good friends with. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to tell you about another story about I think I did mention about the state trooper, didn't I?
Yeah. I think so. I'm not sure.
Yeah. When I first met Green in Dehinden, there was a Washington State trooper who was at the camp also, and he had one walk in front of his car one night there and was investigating the ongoings in that area at the time. And he said he tracked one to a place where they were screaming and mimicking coyote noises, and it was drawing the coyotes in. Of course, when the coyotes got too close, they were grabbing them by the hindquarters and smashing their heads on trees about 8 feet off the ground and eating them. And what he found scared him so bad, he crawled out of the area on his hands and knees because he was scared. So that was always a pretty interesting story to me.
Yeah.
And this was somebody that wasn't really afraid of much of anything.
Yeah.
And coming from law enforcement, to me, had a lot of credibility.
Yeah, that is a great story. Tell me about Rene Dehinden in the later years. Did him and John Green fell out, right? They weren't friends anymore.
In fact,
do you know what happened there?
Well, when I first met the two of them, I do know what happened. When I first met the two of them, they were really not partners anymore then at all. In fact, Dehinden and another guy who was there by the name of Dennis Gates, who was an investigator, kind of stayed away from Green. Green had his travel trailer there. And I wondered, I didn't really know at the time. I was all of 17, so I didn't really know what was going on, and was kind of starstruck by these two guys. So I followed Dehinden around. The two of us did a lot of the searching the nights we were there. and I asked Renee later, years later, about what happened between him and Green, and his take on it was that Green used, and the agreement was the pictures they got out of Northern California footprints during the 60s were going to go in Green's books. And, Renee was okay with that, but then when they came out, he claims that Green didn't give him any credit for the pictures. Well, in Green's books, his name was all over the pictures, so,
Right.
I'm not sure why. Renee's thing was he always felt that he should have been alone in charge of the whole Bigfoot investigation.
Hello?
Business partner with Patterson.
Right.
In fact, there were some shenanigans there. Renee used to accuse everybody else of doing dirty things with Bigfoot evidence, and really he did it also. The incident there, Mrs. Patterson told me that when the original film disappeared, and she told me that Renee had been haranguing her about, because he had already had the rights to the still photos, and he wanted the rights to the film also, and she wouldn't give those up. So he was in Yakima this particular time, and I don't recall what year it is offhand, but when they were going to discuss this, the film and the original footprints. Now, Roger Patterson cast 3 tracks the night or the evening after they got the film. They got the film, they went into Willow Creek, talked to the store owner there, and then they went back up to the site to cast the tracks because it looked like it was going to rain. And of the 3 tracks he cast, one of them broke, so they had 2, a left and a right. And Mrs. Patterson said that the tracks and the original film vanished from the lawyer's office. And it was coincidental that Renee was in town at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, in the late 80s, I was at Renee's home. We were sitting around one evening talking about the film, and he was telling me that he had the individual pictures on slides. We were talking about clarity of the pictures. And I said, well, Renee, get the slides out. Let's take a look. So we got the slides out, and we were looking at them outside on the side of one of these 2 trailers that he had hooked together. And he says, I have the original film, too, in my safe. And I just kind of like, oh, okay. I didn't know what to think about it. And I didn't really believe him because I knew that the film had disappeared. Well, in '92, we were talking about a business arrangement and selling copies of footprint casts. Well, again, at his house, he brought out the original footprint casts, and he loaned those to me. I made molds from them, still have the molds, and gave him back the originals. So in my mind, if he had those casts, then he had the film. And I didn't know about these things disappearing from the attorney's office until a few years later when I talked to Mrs. Patterson.
So, do you know what happened to the film after he died?
No, as far as I know, everything belongs to his 2 sons. Now, I recently saw Bill Munns do some work on the film on a YouTube video, and it's very good what he did by clearing up the film footage. And it says in there that he took the pictures from the original film, so maybe, the sons gave the film back to Mrs. Patterson. I don't know.
Oh, okay. That would be interesting. If I don't know why they would give it back to her. I mean, if they thought it was their father's.
Yeah,
film.
Exactly.
I mean,
yeah,
wouldn't they want to make money off of it?
I haven't talked to Mrs. Patterson for a couple of years, so I don't know. And the sons, I've never talked to the sons. Renee was, he told me once, and I saw an interview later years ago. He used to kind of joke about it. He said his wife gave him the ultimatum. It was either Bigfoot or her and the boys. He says, I chose Bigfoot.
Yeah.
and as far as I know, he never looked back.
I remember
later in
saying
life,
that
he mentioned once. What's that?
I remember him saying that in an actual film interview with him. Yeah.
But we used to chat about it once in a while. He'd say, I probably shouldn't have done that, but he says, somebody had to do this. He used to tell me that he used to be, years ago, he would talk about him and Green both. They believed that killing one was the only way to prove one existed. And they asked me, they said, well, do you have a shotgun? And I said, yeah, I've got a 12-gauge pump. And he said, well, loaded up with double-aught buck and slugs alternating. He said the double-aught buck is for knockdown power, the slug is for killing. And that used to be years ago, the mentality, of course, then it changed because I think public pressure about not wanting to kill one. But Rene used to tell me, he'd say, well, I hope that hairy bugger walk up to me in his last breath, feed the Hendon and have a heart attack and fall over. He says, then I have it. He says, and he used to say, I'd say, well, Rene, what would you do with one if you got one? He says, I'd call National Geographic, tell them what I had, tell them to get somebody over with money-making decisions. He says, I'd sell the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel for $10 million. He says, I'd have my name in the history books attached to it. I'd have the money. I wouldn't have the headaches of having to deal with it.
Right.
And but he believed wholeheartedly that he should have been the only one that had anything to do with this. I can kind of understand because he started the whole thing really as far as public knowing about it really got started.
Right. You knew these guys real well and back then. And I know you were just a young guy, but have you written all this down? Was this in your first book? All these conversations
Some of it
you
is,
had?
Yeah.
Great. I have to read the book then. This sounds like a good book. That's great that you did that because that's history. I mean, you gotta.
I was lucky to be in that position to know, Green and Bob Titmus and Grover Krantz and some of those guys. I read something recently on a blog where they were trying to say that Bob Titmus faked stuff, and that guy was the best Sasquatch hunter that ever existed.
I remember you writing
his entire home. I mean, he was in a lot of pain a few years before he died, physical pain, and he would sleep on a cot. The rest of his house was a workshop. If somebody was faking something, they certainly wouldn't live like that. Mm-hmm. But that guy, he knew his stuff.
Didn't the people that said that, like Peter Byrne and the Hendon, aren't they the ones that said that he used to fake evidence for Tom Slick back in the day so that Tom would pick him as the guide or, as his number one guy back then?
Well, I don't know about Byrne so much, but I know Rene used to, and there was a lot of jealousy. Rene was all of 26 when the Northwest Expedition was going on, and Slick did choose Titmus to head that. But, you look back, when you knowing those people, none of them made any money doing it. In fact, it was a rare occasion when their gas and food was compensated for, and largely the expedition fell apart because of it. There was hardly any support from Slick. So it was a lot of promises and things going on that really didn't pan out. So there was no money to be made from it. And Titmus had a lot of integrity. He would never have faked anything. I don't care what these guys say. There was no way.
Right. Well,
and he showed me a lot of things personally that I was able to go back years later in the field and verify myself. So he knew what he was talking about.
I agree that he knew how to find Bigfoot. I agree.
He did, and he was really the only one looking at that time in Northern California. So, and he was in a prime place where a lot was going on.
Tell me this: did you ever see more of the film than is out there today that we see? The 50 minutes, the 50 seconds, or whatever it is. Have you ever seen any more of it from Rene or from anybody that you've talked to back then that there was more film, but it's not out?
Not that I'm aware of. Rene, he was probably the most knowledgeable person about that film that ever lived. He told me, he said that when Patterson got the film, I quit hunting Sasquatch. He said I spent the next 20 years investigating Patterson and Gimlin and everything behind that. In fact, there's been, of course, this stuff put out about a guy wearing a suit, which is absolute nonsense. Anybody that's been to the film
I don't believe that at all, no.
I went there a few years ago. My brother-in-law and I had to hike in there, and it's miles to get in there because, you could probably drive an ATV, but we hiked in, and in those days, they rode their horses up the stream to get there, and it would have been impossible, not to mention there weren't many roads, and the road crews lived right on the road, so anybody going in there besides Patterson and Gimlin would have been seen by these workers, and they said the only two that were in there were those two gentlemen. So
yeah, and plus the thing is, that suit, it would have been the best suit ever made, until to this day. Nobody's ever produced a suit that fits someone that perfectly that you could see the muscles.
Well, Jevning said they took the film to Disney at the time. That was the number one special effects people, and the response from those people was, "We wish we could do something that good."
Yeah. Stacy, you got a question?
You can see the muscles moving and everything in the body.
For sure.
Yeah, Dave in the chat room, Will wanted to know about your work with the Knott's Berry Farms Bigfoot Rapids. Can you know? I'm not aware of that. Can you?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Hey, Dave in the chat room wanted me to ask you about his work with Knott's Berry Farms Bigfoot Rapids. I'm not familiar with what that is.
Okay, I was the technical advisor for that in 1988. What they wanted to do was create. They created, at the time, it was the largest whitewater rapids, man-made whitewater rapids in the U.S., and in the center of it they had vegetation and wildlife from the Northwest, kind of to recreate it, and they had a whitewater rapids ride. It was called Bigfoot Rapids. As far as I know, it's still in operation. And they were in northern Oregon looking for somebody who knew about Bigfoot at the time, and one of the local papers had done a couple articles about me, and this person happened to see the articles, come and talk to me, so they wanted me to be the technical advisor for the project.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I read that too on your page. That was interesting that you're involved in all that.
It was fun.
When do you think your new book will be out, or do you have an idea yet?
Well, I started working on. I was going to do something dealing with primarily the Cascade Mountain Range from the Canadian border down to Northern California. And the more I've been researching, I've been getting stuff from people around the country, and I couldn't possibly leave out some of the information I've been receiving from different Bigfoot groups. And then now this cover-up stuff has sort of diverted my attention, so I'm kind of working on two directions, one, another Bigfoot book, one about cover-ups. So it kind of depends on the flow of information, how it comes in.
I think the cover-up is the way to go. I mean, if you can get
it could certainly be interesting. It's interesting to me because not really being aware of somebody having been involved in this for so many years, and again, looking back, it's sort of like, well, geez, no wonder we haven't got anywhere with this. If this is really going on, then our efforts are being wasted, which kind of ticks me off, because I spend many thousands of hours and a lot of money in logistics going out trying to find stuff. And if somebody's suppressing that, well, it's wasting my time and money.
Yeah.
Not to mention the public has the right to know this.
Yeah, these creatures are out there, and I believe all you guys. I believe you guys, but there's got to be somebody suppressing information, or we would have something by now. I mean, we would.
I think you're
Somebody
absolutely
would have killed one and brought it out in the public by now, and it hasn't happened. So.
And there have been bodies found, but usually it's a case where they don't know what to do with it.
Or they're scared to death and they think they killed somebody, one of these crazy human beings or something like that was living out in the woods.
Back
now they got to be 8 feet tall and covered in hair. I mean, that's I don't know.
And it used to be there were things found that nobody knew what to do with. You look back, and I put some of the articles in my book from the 1800s, the 1830s. There was bones found, and somebody wrote a doctor, I don't recall offhand the details, but it's in the book, asking what they thought they should do with it or what it was. No response. In 1885 in British Columbia, one was actually captured by a train crew, and it was going to be taken to Europe and shown around. It was a young one. Apparently died on board, and they threw the body overboard. In those times they didn't know what they had, and it wasn't a big deal. Green lists plenty of occasions in his book where one was shot, and having used to hunt deer, I know plenty of times when somebody has shot something, knew they hit it, found the blood trail, lost the deer because it took off running, and it could have run maybe 100 yards off the trail, and how would you find it? It could be the same thing with these guys.
Yeah. Chuck, are you there, bud? I think, Will, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we lost Chuck. I've been intermittently losing you during the show, too. And we're down to the last anyway. I think we've gone to Probably down to 10 seconds right now, actually.
Okay.
But I think we might have lost Chuck there. We lost you a couple times.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we just
I hear
lost
you.
you. I was just about to end the show, and now you're back in now. Sorry about that.
Okay, I keep hearing a woman's voice on my phone. I don't know who it is. Maybe somebody's tapping into my line. But, Will, I wanted to thank you, and please get back with us when your book comes out, okay?
You bet. Sure will. Appreciate
and
you
thank
coming
you
on the
so
show.
much for coming on. I really
you're
very
welcome.
interesting. So definitely a different angle for the whole.
Well, it sure is. I sure hope people will contact me and bring some of this information forward. I know some of it's been out there, but nobody's really focused on it, and I'd like to do that.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope so too.
I think we need to know what's going on.
We do. And I thank you so much for all the work you've been doing on this. And please keep in touch, okay?
You bet.
Thank you so much. Please come
You're
back
welcome.
soon.
Oh,
All right.
sure will.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
you bet. Bye now.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Well, Stacy, another good show.
Yeah, it was a great show.
Well, sorry, I don't know why people lose me. I swear to God, I think the government's tapping my phone.
Well, there were several people were losing sound intermittently throughout the show too, and you got to chalk it up to another one of those BTR deals,
I spent like a whole minute saying, Will, can you hear me?
Well, I was about to end the show anyway. Luckily, it didn't happen in the middle of the show, so that's good.
Right.
So, okay, it was another great show. I love that angle. It's very interesting to hear about some of the things that go on, especially in other parts of the country. That was definitely a different angle. So, okay, until next week, I think you want to tell everybody who we got next week, and then we will call it a day.
Next week we have Dr. John Bindernagel, who will be telling us all about his Russian trip and what went on over there and the evidence they found. So please join us next week for Dr. John Bindernagel. And I'll see you then, Stacy.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Hope you have a good week. Bye-bye.
Good night.